The teaser does an effective job of introducing Ogre's force, the different members, their fighting style, as well as reminding the audience how powerful Ogre is and how he's still looking for a worthy opponent. We also get another person who likes to compare combat to food. Ogre did the same thing in episode 2, it just wasn't as obvious, he didn't do it as much. But now we've got another character, Ogre's much more of a focus for this episode. So yeah, get ready for food wars. Hey look, it's Doji! And he's got a break decal. You can see it right there, just a big ol' spoiler right there. That's not foreshadowing. Also yes, this is gonna be another break boost episode. I'm gonna delve into the financial logistics of this scene. To design a uniform for Momo and this opposing team costs extra money. Someone had to design that, the design had to be approved. If they had had this be a practice match where they're just in their school uniforms, it would have objectively cost less money to animate because they already know what the uniforms look like. The reason I bring this up is because we hardly ever see these uniforms. They're there for just a few frames of animation, and then it's just Yuki and Riku not even paying attention to the game, so they can have a flashback, which saves money because that lets them reuse assets from previous episodes. They spend money to design new assets in the form of the soccer uniforms, and yet they save money with the flashback. I'm confused. This could pay off if the soccer club plot gets more screen time, or maybe they're planning a Momo soccer club uniform figure. Oh, I think she notices that Yuki and Riku aren't paying attention.
そんなのいつものことでしょじゃなくて決まったのバトランダムの対戦相手
The battle is referencing Gundam 0080 War in the Pocket, and the monthly random battle event could actually be an effective way to introduce new characters.
GBN がそれぞれのフォースのレベルなんかを考慮してマッチングするんだ。
どんな相手かドッキドキ
Of course they got randomly matched up with Ogre. I can accept that maybe Ogre just started his force recently and that's why they're roughly the same level. It just seems like one of those plot conveniences that you just have to kind of accept. The show cuts back to Ogre to see his recruiting strategy. If he finds someone who's a worthy opponent, he invites them to join his force. I have no idea why this image is here, but if you're wondering why Riku wasn't invited... It's important for Riku to say something so we know that he's not just doing this because of his promise to Sarah. If he didn't say anything, people would just assume it was her fault he didn't get to use Transam, and that would cause a lot of problems for the show. Koichi explains to Riku, and by extension the audience, that there are drawbacks to using Transam, there are strategies to counter Transam, so that's what Riku's gonna do. Riku just asked permission to keep his promise not to use Transam. This is why they needed that line earlier to establish that that's not the only reason why he's not using Transam. In the battle this is based on, the attackers had special amphibious mobile suits and half the team snuck in through the submarine dock. Ogre was always going to go for a direct attack, that's his style, but having someone on Riku's force blow up the submarine dock emphasizes that because this is a game, you don't have to worry about collateral damage. The battle that this is referencing has been turned into this game level with new elements like the anti-aircraft guns, the fact that you can attack the base in different ways, you have to strategize around that. This is the kind of expanding upon the Gundam universe that is greatly appreciated. Insulting Doji, and that's the same damage Yuki got in episode 1. It's funny and interesting. Now it's time for an epic off-screen battle. Yes, the rematch between Doji and Riku happens off-screen. That's not the root problem with this episode. The problem with this episode is it jumps around too much. For the first half, I can kind of understand that. That's mostly dialogue, exposition, not a lot of movement, not a lot of action. They need to make sure it's not a long period of people just sitting around and talking. But when they carry that over to the actual action scenes, which is what they're supposed to be focusing going on. It just seems like they took a quantity over quality approach. Instead of having a good fight, we have these little cutaways to just establish that the only person who can go provide backup for Riku is Ayame, and Ogre's going to fight Riku, so he's gonna be outnumbered. I actually agree with Ogre's sentiment, considering the first half was mostly exposition dialogue, and then they turned that cool knife guy in Ogre's force into Momo's comic relief opponent. Riku manages to hold his own at first, and then... This is similar to what happened in episode 2, but in that fight, Ogre was trying to get Riku to use Transam. Ogre saw Riku's potential early on, but didn't think that Riku was taking the game seriously. Now Ogre's acknowledged Riku's fighting style, his choice not to use Transam, and Ogre sees him as a worthy opponent. A worthy opponent who's about to lose, but still. They never actually show Doji activate the brake decal, which means if you want, you could assume that it was activated remotely and that somehow preserves Doji's character. Also, it could be considered unintentionally hilarious that Riku was technically saved by Doji. That's an effective way to remind the audience that there's more to Ayame's character. For now, Doji's not in control of his Gunpla, and he's crying about it. We get some evil smirking, then some glitch tornadoes start forming. Ogre's had enough of this, he just charges in. It doesn't work out so well. With the regenerating tentacles, I'm confident that these transformations are all software-based. Riku's come up with a counter-strategy, leading to the funniest exchange in the episode. The brief pause as Ogre looks at Riku is what sells it. From a character perspective, I can actually see Ogre being so against brake decals he doesn't want to use their weapons. Also, from a practical standpoint, there is a risk that someone could get penalized for using a brake decal enhanced weapon, even though they weren't the one to activate the brake decal. And if you're wondering, yes, this has happened in games before. And with that, Ogre and Riku team up to save the day! And now Doji's Gunpla isn't suffering anymore. It's supposed to look like the Gunpla is suffering, but with Doji, it's hard to take that seriously. Ogre surrenders, which is understandable given everything that's happened, and then we get some interesting symbolism as the shuttle flies through that hole in the clouds that Doji had created earlier. Doji faces slightly more consequences than Staya did in the last episode. I'm just glad we have some consequences this time. The victory for this episode was Ogre acknowledging Riku as a worthy opponent. As for the actual in-game victory, Riku's force isn't really able to enjoy it because this event was ruined by all the mass diver shenanigans. The first half of this episode was mostly exposition, and then when they get to the second half, there's so much going on and they jump around so much, Doji's rematch with Riku is pretty much ignored, and then they don't even show the weakness to Transam, which is something they hinted at earlier. Ogre and Doji having their rematch with Riku had several episodes to build up. There was anticipation. And I want to be clear, this is a good episode. Episode 7 did a much better job of managing the fight scene, and in a way, Riku and the rest of his force were looking forward to this rematch, just like the audience was, and then that got ruined by the mass divers. I doubt that was meant to be intentional symbolism, and I'm not trying to say that this is some great artistic symbolism, but it is food for thought, and now I'm talking like Ogre. This is the Hypervisor, signing off.